Jesus just wants you to be happy. That statement is controversial. There are two groups inside the church, two groups that are pretty extreme inside the church when it comes to that statement. There's the one group that would say that that's true, and then there's this other group that would say that it's false. Now even that group that says that it's false, they would say, oh yeah, Jesus wants you to be happy, but it's not until eternity. It's not until you die and you're with Jesus forever, or until Jesus comes back. And even though there is some truth to that, it's pretty dangerous to say things like Jesus doesn't care about your happiness here on earth. A lot of times they say he only cares about his glory. And that is 100% true, that Jesus is all about his glory. But you know what else is true? That Jesus completely tied our joy and our happiness to his glory. And that's why that statement's dangerous when people go around saying, oh, Jesus doesn't care about your happiness here, because it doesn't describe who Jesus really is. In fact, when Jesus describes himself, he says he's the God of compassion and mercy and unfailing love. And if you think of even the fruit of the Spirit that the Holy Spirit produces in our lives, it's love. And then what comes next? Joy. And even though these are characteristics, there are these feelings that come along with them. And so it's dangerous to go around to this extreme and say Jesus doesn't care about your happiness here on earth. And so the other side is pretty dangerous too. The extreme group in the church that goes, this is true. Jesus just cares about your happiness. And the reason that's dangerous is because a lot of times what happens is we start to say things like, well, if it makes me happy, then it's from Jesus. And if it doesn't make me happy, then it's not from Jesus. And the problem with that is that we're all too human. And that we'll be tempted to let our feelings lead us. And we'll have feelings of excitement, and we'll start to call those feelings happiness. And a lot of times we can have those feelings of excitement about things or even people or relationships in our life that are sinful. And this is what the Holy Spirit is talking about in James chapter 1 when he's talking about evil desires within us. That they give us these feelings of excitement sometimes, and we start to go down that path. And he gives the example of having a baby. Where two people having a baby, right, they would experience what they would think is happiness, even in, becoming pregnant. And then they have the baby, and you think you're preparing for this life to come into the world, and you're so excited, and you're preparing the baby room and all this stuff, and you can't wait to give birth to this child. And then it gives the illustration of it gives birth to death. It's like giving birth to a stillborn baby, like being at the hospital and having this child that you're so excited to have, and you think it's going to bring life and joy, and it's dead. And it's talking about giving into evil desires and being deceived and not realizing that those desires are evil and sinful, and confusing maybe feelings of excitement with what true joy and happiness is. And so it's dangerous. I mean, there's like 5 chapters in 1 Corinthians, chapter 6 through 10, that I like to call like the biblical Surgeon General's warning, right? That if you think about this, it starts in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12, and it says, oh, you say I'm allowed to do anything, but not everything is good for you. And then it goes on to say, and you must not become a slave to anything. And it goes, listen, Jesus goes, listen, you can say that the stomach is for food and food's for the stomach. That makes sense, right? I'm supposed to eat food. And he goes, but you can't say that your body was for sexual sin or for sexual immorality. Just because your body is made in a way to have sex doesn't mean you can run around and do it however you want with whoever you want. And it just starts with that example. And it starts to go through all these other examples, and throughout those 5 chapters, what it's doing is it's warning about doing whatever you want and thinking it's going to be okay, and confusing these things of excitement, right? It talks about the Israelites in the wilderness and how they went around and they started to do whatever they want and indulge in evil things and sexual immorality and different things, and how they were destroyed in the wilderness. And they had this excitement where they thought they were going to get to go to the promised land and enjoy this great land after being taken out of slavery, but it didn't end that way for them, right? It ended in death. And he starts to talk about like, hey, you can't sit at the table of demons and sit at the Lord's table too. And then in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, it kind of sums all that up by saying it again. It goes, you say I'm allowed to do whatever I want, but not everything is good for you. You say I'm allowed to do whatever I want, but not everything is beneficial. That you can't just go do whatever you want and think that it's going to bring life. Because like I said, like a lot of times those feelings of excitement that we confuse or mistake for happiness are rooted in things that ultimately bring death. And the reason I call that the Surgeon General's warning, the biblical Surgeon General's warning, is because when I think about like cigarettes, for example, there was a time where everybody smoked. Doctors smoked while they saw their patients. People were encouraged to smoke, even saying that it could be healthy for you. And then what happened was after some time and some research, they found out like, hey, this actually causes death. And so they put a warning on the side of cigarettes that says, hey, this is going to kill you. And what happened? Sure, some people were like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing that anymore. But then what happened? Others just kept doing it anyway. I used to be one of them, and you just go buy the pack anyway. And it says right on the side, hey, this is going to kill you, but you just do it anyway, as if it's not going to. And you blow right past it. And that's what Jesus is saying here in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 through 10. It's this, like I said, this biblical Surgeon General's warning of going, you can't just go do whatever you want to do and think you have this freedom in Jesus to go do whatever you want to do and experience life and life to the fullest, because this is what I do know to be true. Now, I know this to be absolutely true when it comes to Jesus, is that he does want you to be happy. That he does want me to be happy. He wants us to be happy. I know that that's true because Jesus didn't create us so we could be sad and miserable, right? He created us so that we could experience him and his glory and experience joy and happiness and life to the fullest. And when all that was broken because of sin, Jesus didn't leave his throne and come to earth and die on the cross so that we could be sad and miserable. He did that so we could be reunited with him, so he could regain possession of us, that which was lost. And that we could be made right with him again, and we could experience his glory and experience him and experience true joy and true happiness and life to the fullest. I know that Jesus wasn't raised from the dead and put his spirit in us so that we could be sad and miserable. It was so that we could be filled with the one who is life and experience joy and happiness and life to the fullest as we're one with him and we're raised from the dead. And I know that Jesus isn't returning so that we can be sad and miserable. That his home will be among us and he's going to make everything new. Everything new. And that there's going to be no pain and no suffering and none of that, so that we can experience him always and forever and have joy and real happiness and real life to the fullest. That's what Jesus says, that his purpose in John 10:10, he goes, hey, my purpose is to give you a rich and satisfying life, or life to the fullest. But here's the thing. We don't get to define what that looks like. Only the one who designed you does. And that's Jesus. But what I do know is that he wants you to be happy. He wants you to have joy, and he wants you to have life to the fullest, and not just in eternity, and not just in heaven, but here and now. And that's why Jesus is talking in John 10:10. He's talking about being inside his design. He's talking about being a sheep in his sheep pen and listening to his voice and just following his voice and living in surrender and submission to him in obedience. As much as everybody seems to hate that word as if it's a bad word, it's the greatest word ever when we're talking about being obedient to Jesus. That Jesus is saying there's life to the fullest, but it's only inside his design. Jesus is going, it's only inside my design. And so when Jesus tells you no to something, it's not because he doesn't want you to be happy. It's because he wants you to have joy. He wants you to be happy. When Jesus tells you to run from something, it's not because he doesn't want you to be happy or have joy. It's because he does want you to have joy He does want you to be happy. He wants you to experience life and life to the fullest. When he says yes to something, it's the same thing. When he tells you to run to something, which is always him, it's the same thing. And so when he gives you something, he wants you to have joy and happiness and life to the fullest. And when he takes something away, same thing. It's because he wants you to have joy and real happiness and experience life and life to the fullest. But here's what I know, is that when we don't obey, or we even delay in our obedience, we miss out. Because we miss out on joy. We miss out on happiness. We miss out on life, and we miss out on life to the fullest. Because obedience to Jesus isn't about doing some things, but it's about being with him. And so when we're not obedient, or we delay in our obedience, we miss out on being with him and experiencing him and his glory. And so one of the things, he gives us his word, and he just tells us exactly what to do, what not to do, how to be with him, and to just remain in him. And like I said, I know that this is for here and now, because anybody who followed him experienced joy and happiness and life to the fullest here and now on this earth. David would say, man, Jesus is my joy. In fact, the joy of having Jesus is my strength. He would say, Jesus satisfies me more than the richest feast. My cup overflows because Jesus is my shepherd. And it wasn't just David. It went on and on. All the prophets, all of them, all the people of real faith. John the Baptist he had joy and joy to the fullest just to stand next to Jesus and see Jesus become greater and greater. But it was when he became less and less. And said he just had this joy in being close to Jesus. And Jesus would say that. He goes, you remain in me and I'll remain in you, in John chapter 15. And what Jesus is saying is, he even says at the end of verse 11, John chapter 15, verse 11, he goes, man, I've told you this so that your joy will overflow. And so Jesus is going, here and now, I want you to experience this joy and happiness. John the disciple goes, I'm writing these things so you guys can share in my joy and share in our joy, and your joy will be complete. Peter goes, I have this inexpressible joy. And Paul, right? He's writing from prison going, I'm so joyful. Rejoice. You should be rejoicing. I have all this joy and all this happiness, as he writes from prison. And he goes, even though my heart aches sometimes, I always have this joy. And so one of the things I know that I think about all the time when it comes to doing something, or when I have these thoughts, right? Because I got to be careful that I'm not following my thoughts and my ways and trying to pawn them off as Jesus's thoughts and his ways, even if they have feelings of excitement. I don't want my feelings to get up front and lead me. Okay, does this bring Jesus glory? Because if it doesn't bring Jesus glory, it's not going to bring me joy. It's not going to bring me happiness. And it's not going to bring you joy or you happiness either, if whatever you're doing or whatever you're headed towards or whatever you're after doesn't bring Jesus glory.